я бы пересмотрел. Насколько ты...
Я просто сделала скриншот, когда ты написала.
Да, убрала.
Ролик,
Всем там убрали. Да. А на эту тему у нас будет?
Да.
Я
Я написала, стрим уже запускаю.
Давай, да, 2 минуты дадим, а то у нас расписание такое плотненькое.
Ты меня уже включила, в принципе, сейчас пару минут ждем, что потянется. Да?
Подождите уже кидать меня, что?
Да не, у нас помидорчик есть.
Я телефон ушел.
Ну, еще без 1 минуты. Вам нужно всех 5 минут ждать.
Надо как-то, блин, разбить так, чтобы они одни девочки были, чтобы у нас тут падать или
У нас сегодня воркшоп, девчонки.
Я думаю, что
это не просто подключить.
Прятаться нельзя, за каким-то словом все.
Нет, все разумеют, да, слушай, ну надо будет распределять как-то народу.
Спасибо.
Да.
Зачем проверить? Мы заказали, что проверить.
Ну что мы дом сейчас делаем?
Сейчас раз выборы.
Раз как надо, то я задала.
Ну что, начнем?
Ребят, можно вот здесь вот за третий столик подсаживаться, потому что у нас... Заходите. У нас сегодня...
Ну мы, ничего страшного, мы распределим всех так насильно
Да,
потом.
да. И так как у нас сегодня небольшой воркшоп и не отличается, в смысле, отличается от наших традиционных тиктоков, когда больше теория, когда больше рассказывать. Сегодня мы всегда, когда Алекс приезжает, мы стараемся что-нибудь useful из него вытянуть. И Жене тоже спасибо за то, что он подключился в это. Собственно говоря, сегодня будет тема Managing Distributed Teams, очень актуальная для особенно больших команд, когда у нас есть офис в Аргентине, в Одессе, в Киеве, в Харькове, и команды большие должны как-то хендить друг друга, общаться. И сегодня будет немножко практики, немножко кейсовых, и потом, собственно говоря, разбор податов, что как. И тогда, Алекс, передаю тебе слово. Да, пожалуйста, выключите свои средства мобильной связи, чтобы не мешать.
Ну и главное прослушать задание, поэтому, чтобы все сначала поняли, то есть, как Яна сказала, у нас большинство команд работает в режиме distributed team. И это чаще всего команда, у которой есть люди в US, у них есть люди в Аргентине, есть люди в других местах. Это, соответственно, приносит определенные проблемы в организации, в понятии, что надо делать. Поэтому сегодня мы сделаем такой небольшой воркшоп. Мы разделимся на команды. У нас будет где-то 10 минут, чтобы сесть, и у нас есть такой небольшой принтаут, разобрать один сценарий. После того, как мы разберем этот сценарий и составим вещи, которые нам надо получить от клиента и договориться в своей команде, две команды сделают презентацию по 5 минут. То есть чисто как рекомендацию со стороны, вот, что нам надо от клиента и что нам надо от наших ребят в нашей команде, как мы договоримся. После чего мы пройдемся по ревью, как бы я сделаю примерно такую же презентацию, моя будет чуть-чуть подольше, и, соответственно, questions and answers и так далее. Основная проблема в Distributed Teams. Когда люди работают вместе, в одной комнате, многие вещи делаются путем просто, чувак, давай поговорим, мы решим, сделаем, двигаемся вперед очень быстро, качественно. К сожалению, с Distributed Teams всегда есть какие-то задержки. То есть мы зовем клиента, он не может, мы зовем человека, он не может. Все больше и больше оверхеда и делай. Кстати, давайте я перейду на английский. Что-то я чувствую что-то не то, не могу понять, что именно. So, distributed team challenges. Overhead and delays, that's the main thing to overcome. So in this exercise, think about that and tools, processes, and communication that you need to put in place. The second thing is, a common story is, well, we have a distributed team, so why don't you guys write the spec, tell us what to do, and we're going to build it. We're going to give it to you. So please do not fall into the trap, and basically keep in mind that the more distributed your team is, the more often you need to communicate. Inspect, adapt, reduce your cycles. For this scenario, we have a client that came to us, and they basically want to build a contract review and approval system. They have stakeholders and users for us to talk to, but there's a big constraint. Because of government regulations, they have to do it in 3 months. So by May 1st, we have to deploy the system. The team that's going to do it is something that you probably, well, majority of you guys dealt with, which is stakeholders are all on the US side, sort of business users. We have a business analyst PM that we don't know much about, but we're hoping he's going to be useful. We have a senior developer who's really in middle and will break stuff, guaranteed. And on the Ukraine side, we have a lead developer, senior, middle, and QA. So that's kind of the baseline for you for the team. For the handout, you'll see that we broke it out into 3 stages. Basically, discovery, which is really about what do we need from the client, right? Think about specific questions or specific things we need to request from them. Project setup, favorite topic for a lot of us. What do we need to do on our side to ensure that we can actually have a chance to deliver this in 3 months? And implementation and release, which is primarily around how do we stay on track, right? How do we do the right thing, and how do we plan for changes? So with that, let's split into teams. That's a little bit of a helpful guide for you guys as you go through. And as we split into teams, I recommend that a team has at least one team lead on it, because I see a lot of non-technical people in the room. So there's a team number 4 over here with a handout. Team number 3.
Guys.
I guess team number 2. Oh, that's 3 technical. And where's team number 1? Right there? Well, here you got a sandbagger there, so I think think this is going to work out.
Три Алексея. У нас видел Алексей,
Okay, so the main thing here is that's a scenario, but I just hope for here you have basically a breakdown and pencils for things you would recommend as a team. Something when you from the client, and something when you from our development team. Oh my God, so you guys I guess let's try to do it. See what happens. So basically the point is, so you have
Вам понятно, что надо делать? Я знаю, что
Кантили, скажем.
Совсем понятно, да? У вас есть реквест customer, понятно, кто где написано.
Да. Вы знаете, что вам надо делать? Один разработчик.
So, as I was saying, so two things. One is down to distributed team specific stuff. Guys, quick note. So, because we have limited amount of time, focus on just the distributed team aspect, right? The things I called out specifically. So, how do we coordinate? How do we make sure we know what to do? How do we make sure that the developer from their side doesn't break stuff, or if he breaks stuff, we know he did it, right? So basically, let's not talk too much about other things, about requirements and other things, but just things we need specifically for from distributed team concept.
Да, это понятно. Смотрите, у нас есть финальная задача, да, здесь нужно что-то такое скрипт, жесткий Да, я согласен. Я думаю, что у нас здесь как мы работаем в статусе, да, и в каком формате, что мы вообще движемся туда, куда надо, опять-таки.
Ты помнишь, еще вопрос в том, что как раз распределенно, сколько там чуваков Аргентины, сколько там Маркерс, Киева, ну это важно.
Так я думаю, как раз на приставке мы видим, что надо, потому что сотрудники, потом у нас не должно быть пинг-понга такого, что мы каждый день общаемся, мы должны быть.
So the questions are there just to help. Basically, you guys drive. This was just something to think about. They're not the right answer.
3 месяца на реализацию. Discovery Phase город, я заметил, там 2 недели максимум первые. Первую неделю, грубо говоря, они должны выступить полностью.
Ты просто оперативно идешь по всем фазам одновременно.
Как это понятное дело, почему будет подсначала?
Давайте, помогайте.
Я думаю, может вопрос скилла, да? То есть, если типа общий расчет отправить, да? Там какой-то простой
Алексей
решение заправить, да? То есть мы там что-то сделали, просто самый простой способ. То есть просто надо какой-то сделать. То есть надо, наверное, просто сделать маркетинг, да? Техника составляющая, она вот и исходя из этого, ну, во-первых, выбирать то, что надо вместе заменить, да? Наверное, просто выбирать то, что надо проще сделать. Такой срок не можно особо писать, фантазировать и строить низкиловую архитектуру.
Болел? Люди что, болеют?
The questions they're just like helpful questions that don't cover, right? So you actually have unfair advantage. You kind of work with it. So think about things that you would like from the customer, from the team.
Я не знаю, может есть смысл, если брать можно просто со стороны расширения команды, больше людей, правильно, но если выбирается все 3 месяца, и это я понимаю, важно знать заранее, можно ли рассчитывать на такой срок. Это окей, возможно, так.
Плюс минус, да, давай, ну вообще если ты, ну типа можно вести с клиентом, а вот это есть, да?
Давай почитаем, а что ты его утверждаешь? Вы нас утверждаете? Он это не
может, не сразу, раз у него есть много рабочих, может, он занимается даже не проектом, может, куда-то дергается, это же вопрос такой.
У вас есть план, есть система, есть какие-то первые цели. Ну, это абсолютно. Ну, это, собственно, уже будет сюда,
Мы не можем попробовать заранее повторить такие этапы, когда первой недели, попробовать методики делать себя, потому что вся команда у нас. Я сейчас тебе говорю.
Которая просредила все, что нормально.
А вы только на первой фазе Discovery?
Даже не спать ходит.
момент, когда вы хотите можно его просто записать и сказать, заберите его сюда. Нет,
Guys, 5-minute warning.
Я думаю, что здесь еще так много интересных задач, да, чтобы если он там сидит, надо как-то брать его в наши планинги и все остальное, да, то есть да, ну, хорошо, смотри, у нас 3 месяца, он сделал свою PSI, и хлопал на этот PSI, время потрачено. Как мы вернемся назад? Неплохой бенефит с другой стороны, конечно.
Не думайте о процессе. Думайте, как вы будете трактовать важно, как вы будете создавать критерии, чтобы они были понятны для всех.
И мы будем придумывать, это не наша работа. Мы только их узнаем. Да, это сейчас и будет как раз вопрос, который мы обсуждаем. Не, ну это мы репортим просто кассового по статусу. Я сейчас пытаюсь на девелопера это делать, он же не зря у нас здесь вот. То есть он должен быть fully типа involved in all technical meetings, типа planning и так далее, код-ревью и все остальное, да? Если оно там есть. Неплохо, кстати, да, для шеринга даже разных точек зрения.
Нет, мы должны отвечать на каждый вопрос, или это просто вообще
Да, но при этом надо понять, что это ограничить таски, на которые нужны такие ревью. То есть какие-то с точки зрения бизнеса важные, а не какие-то там допилы маленькие точки. Ну да.
Зачем нам пытаться продлить, чтобы его не было обязательно? Потому что у нас человек сделал утро, до вечера, что он здесь читер. Если он будет
сейчас у нас есть месяц на это все
Я не понимаю, что мы его ненавидим. Бедный чувак, он уже нас ненавидит, наверное. Нет, от них лишний смысл. Смотрите, у нас 3 месяца на задачу, вообще одна задача. Да.
Как наши приезжают,
Я бы все-таки вот сюда, когда я могу попросить добавить рабочий потому что ему есть не все удовольствие решать, да? А вот это уже не ему мне кажется, хотя бы 2 должны быть там. Тогда у них меньше будет типа пересечений с нами.
I think so, but let's see.
Мы будем делать видео.
у нас дуже багато місць теж бить буде, якщо всі будуть балакати. Вам 4 часа на
У нас это все не документация. Нам не нужна комната, да, склейка, но нам нужны и заполненные прописаны. Да, буквально там галочками с подписями каждого электронного, грубо говоря. Очень большое реагируем на изменения, да? Если понятно, что виноват не кастомер, даже если они приходят. Да, но я хотел блин, извините, сильно надо.
Two minutes, guys. 2 minutes.
Да, я если
В этом наша фишка. В этом наша фишка. Мы даже не сделали, это смотри, разработать план.
Потенциально проблема это делает
Вот и не
Подожди, а если мы делаем двоих?
шарик экспертизы. Тут остался X, так да, типа, его надо решить.
Okay, guys, it's time. So let's go ahead and get started with team number 1.
PM team.
PM team. It wasn't planned that way, but somehow it happened. So team number 1, take the stage. Yeah, kind of walk us through what did you come up with.
All right.
English.
All right.
English.
So obviously we're thinking from the PM perspective. It's kind of hard to think of it technically, but anyway, we tried. So first and foremost, we need to make sure that we have all the requirements in place, and this is important for for everybody on the team, for PM, for tech lead, for developer, for QA, everybody, and we need to make sure that they're specific. We need to make sure that they answer a lot of questions. I don't have the questions. It just really depends on the product. We just really have to make sure that they're there. We need to understand, the technology, the technical specifications, the refactoring approach. Whether, how that's gonna take place. That's from a technical perspective. What should we pay attention to during requirements and design? Again, it's not just I want this done. We need to understand that there's an exact outline of how things need to be done, and also we need to make sure that things that are not to be done need to be included as well. I like to point that out a lot. We need to make sure that they have a backlog or a roadmap. It depends on the approach that they select. We need to make sure that we understand a stakeholder, because we're going to be asking them a lot of questions, and we need to really identify. This is a BA perspective. We need to identify the person that we go to, and that's not necessarily a CEO, a CTO. It can be a QA on their side if they have enough information on the product. The deliverables. That's where we're kind of hesitant. I think that's something that we discuss. I think that's something that they present to us.
Yeah, fair enough. Let's keep that.
Okay. Let's see. I also have functional and non-functional requirements. Of course, meetings, maybe budget, depends on the project. Project setup. What activities do we need to do? We need to make sure that we define the documentation that needs to be in place. We need to make sure that we identify the best practices. We need to make sure that we identify the definition of done and definition of ready. And meetings, of course. I mean, this with distributed teams, this is number 1. Meetings on the client side, meetings locally. We have to make sure that we have communication. Let's see, implementation and release. How do you ensure that all developers are on the same page about what to build? We ask them if they understand, and we will look at their work. There's demos, which is also very, very important. A lot of things come up during demos. What do you need to do to continue to stay on the same page? Well, I think we don't really have an answer to every question, because this is kind of one to me personally. We need to have meetings, we need to have demos, we need to have documentation in place. changes. How do you handle changes to the plan? And that's what we need to communicate to the customer. We need to see what they're willing to give up. We need to see if they're willing to give up anything. We need to communicate on the precautions. You know, if we make changes to the plan, they have to know that they may be losing time or money or whatnot.
What if they ignore you?
Ha!
Or
They don't.
Or what-
They don't
okay,
ignore me.
What if they just give you something? And
All right,
not-
if they give
not
me
answering
something but
any
that's not
questions?
enough, I will definitely be sending emails and emails and emails. I will be escalating. I will just make sure that it's said. Nothing's going to be ever assumed. Well, you know, I'll just get to them.
how you
Okay.
are gonna
Mhm.
track your progress? Let's say you have 1 month, how you're gonna track that?
Well, we have a bug tracking system, Jira, documentation.
You didn't include.
Oh, sorry. Thanks. Well, technical tools. That's a good one. Yeah, we have to identify that.
Okay.
Oh, and then for this project, we devised Scrum, obviously.
Okay. Fair
All right,
enough. All right, thank you so much. Who wants to present? We only have time for one more team.
Alexei.
I see somebody just jumping out of the chair, just saying, me.
We have accounting team.
The
All of you money.
most important people.
Basically, we had doubts about what to use, whether it's going to be waterfall or Scrum. Our delivery wanted to use Agile as works in Agile engine. But because we have 1st May and we have 3 months, plus actually customer is looking for vendor. Basically, he needs to review what vendor can build in 3 months. So we believe that we need to use waterfall. And the first thing to do would be to do a feature breakdown and estimate what we understand. Basically, estimation process allows business analyst and customer to understand if we actually get all tasks right. Just because, well, if we estimate a simple task in, let's say, 8-story point and vice versa, obviously there is something wrong with kind of understanding of requirements. Basically, our project timeline would potentially be something like 2 weeks of discovery, research, planning, grooming, etc., and project setup. And we will allocate at least 2 weeks for UAT. Basically, once we deployed somewhere where actually customer stakeholders can look at the system, not only BA or QA. And basically, optimistically, we have 2 months with some buffer for implementation. Based on this breakdown, we'll be able to pretty much show customer what we can build, what can be potentially excluded from the scope, etc., etc. It's kind of project management routine. I guess regarding actual topic and distributed teams, basically the main concern is to establish cross-team communication, and just because we know from our spec that it's UA US team, we have at least 2 hours to pretty much join different calls. At the same time, we don't want calls to infinite development. So the important piece here will be to do feature kickoff calls where business analyst will actually see how development team understand kind of what needs to be done and if developers got it right. What else? Basically, obviously, continuous integration. It was mentioned that there is a senior, middle developer on the customer side, so obviously tests. And what's more important is like continuous integration, where business analyst and QA can test and track progress on a daily basis and provide feedback right away.
Yeah, but you work in waterfall, so you don't have deliverables.
Why? Waterfall doesn't mean that you don't have deliverables. You have iterations similar to Scrum. It's just that you have pretty much all requirements defined beforehand. And I also mentioned buffer in order to, well, we'll include, let's say, 20% buffer in order to work on unaccounted features. Plus, we have UAT in order to fix all problems. But basically,
it's not classic waterfall.
What?
It's not
What
classic
if they don't want
Right.
waterfall? I mean, you're suggesting, right?
Yeah, what they don't want Scrum. Customer knows that we need to build it by May 1st.
Right.
And by using Scrum, okay, you have backlog, you have some.
No, that's okay.
sprints
But what if
planned.
they say it just wants Scrum?
Yeah.
How are you going to go about it?
Yeah, Waterfall allows us to provide to customer actual kind of modified project timeline and actually kind of get better vision of how we understood. Plus, if we see that customer wants to see at kind of initial kind of, let's say, deliverable first, obviously our estimates and other stuff kind of will be very helpful to him.
To answer the question, if the customer wants Scrum, right, we don't have to call things waterfall. What we'll do is Scrum with iteration 0 of collecting requirements, so discovery phase.
Yeah, but at the end, kind of Scrum doesn't allow us to commit to exact date. That is how I see it, because well, this is Scrum.
Okay, fair enough.
This is all about
It's convenient for us, but we wanted to win this contract. So what else? Obviously, basically all kind of issue tracking, continuous integration, live demo environment, DevKA, daily calls, of course, and that's very important. Plus, we would schedule additional calls if we see that there is some kind of issues, with understanding requirements. So,
How do you know with waterfall if you're still on track, and how do you communicate it?
what?
How do you know with waterfall that you're on track with your plan?
Well, we use an issue tracker. Again, it's issue tracker is not tied to Scrum. Issue tracker is just part of the process, not part of like methodology you chose. So even moreover with waterfall, you will have kind of better tracks on where you should have been by this date versus compared to where you are right now.
How do you demonstrate the progress to the customer throughout the development process?
Okay, that's a very good question. That's why I mentioned that we need to have live demo environment and continuous integration. Maybe with, not maybe, but in, I guess, my mind, continuous integration also assumes some continuous delivery, at least to DevQA environment. Basically, if you have set up project right, and we have 2 weeks, which should be more than enough to do that, basically every commit will lead to new build, new deployment, and worst case, BA or QA, or even stakeholders, if they have access to the system, can see it in like 15 minutes. In other words, that saves a lot of time on actual communication where you need to schedule a demo day, even though it's still nice to have at least once in 2 weeks. Still, basically, and we just know this thing works because we follow that on our current project. And basically, we can get immediate feedback, and pretty much by the time you come here at the office, like usually, here morning, you will have enough feedback from BA or other people who reviewed what you've done, basically, and you will have time to apply this feedback. So.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much. All right, I think that's all we have time for as far as presentations. Plus, I don't know what else to say after Alex. All right, so let's kind of go through, both presentations were great. Interestingly, they covered kind of 2 sides of the gamut there, right? So PM, and then Alex pretty much went through everything. So from the distributed teams, the most important thing is to set clear roles and expectations from the beginning. Not in the middle of the process, but from the beginning. So in other words, if somebody comes to you and says, you got 3 months, you come to them and you say, guys, here's what I need you to do. Here's what you're gonna do, you're gonna do, and you're gonna do. And if you're not committing to that, I cannot commit to 3 months, sorry. What some good example of that is scheduling all of your stakeholders, users, and pretty much the meetings, right? So one of the things is you come in and you talk about it. The other way is you come in and there's an agenda of all the meetings that we're going to have. Let's put them on a calendar. Let's agree on dates and times, because I don't like staying up at night. I'm sure you guys probably don't either. And the customers are flexible, so if you tell them that let's do meetings at 9 o'clock, they do it at 9 o'clock. So the point here is this critical thing of pre-scheduling. Avoid surprises of trying to track somebody down midway through the process. You know what I'm talking about? And then sitting around saying for 2 days, I don't have any feedback, I don't have anything to do. As Alex mentioned, whatever methodology you pick, right? So waterfall is actually a good enough approach, but it has a bad name. So we don't usually say waterfall, but essentially we do the same thing, because if somebody tells me you got 3 months, I'm not gonna build it until I actually understand what they want, and I will still understand that there will be change. And as I mentioned in a kind of previous slide, right, plan for change. So you cannot use waterfall with sign off, that's not gonna work. But you use discovery phase to understand what's needed, break down the feature, do the estimation, put buffers, figure out your risks, and then expect that 25% of that will change. And the first time you do the demo, 25% of that will change. And the second time you do the demo. And when the users get the final system, 25% of it will change. So you have to plan for that. The key there is daily communication, right? So blocker or clarification, it doesn't have to be with everybody. Essentially, if we deploy something to integration environment, people can look at it themselves. But the key is that daily you're having stand-ups, you have a touch point, and you're talking to the customer. So basically, do not assume that if you're writing comments on the ticket, that that's communication and everything's clear. Slack, email will generate all kinds of issues and miscommunication de facto every time. If you talk to the customer, you're able to ask questions, better understand what they want. Demos of completed functionality, the more often the better. If you cannot do, if it's not feasible for you to do a demo of a feature, okay, do a screencast maybe, send it to the customer and say, hey, is that how you expected it to work? And then user acceptance testing period. Key is that everybody has to be available for all of these, right? So if I have 3 months, I'm gonna say, guys, between this date and this date, you better not have any vacations, right? If there's a Christmas or there's Thanksgiving, let's move it. Or you give me people who will be user accepting this stuff. So pre-schedule. And then the most important thing, there's a VA there, but as I mentioned, I don't know if that VA is going to be of any use. So what that means is if you're participating in customer calls, get into the habit of capturing meeting notes and basically doing your own mock-ups, because you are the one that's responsible for delivering, right? Business analyst, yeah, maybe not your job to figure out what the customer wants, but really you're the one that's going to deliver the solution. It's going to come out of your mind. Therefore, you have to understand why we're doing it, what we're doing. Do not look at a business analyst as a, he knows. Doesn't sometimes. But they write faster than you probably. Put together prettier documents. So try to make use of that. If they're not doing it, you guys track your notes. Project setup. I'd say the key around project setup is establishing everything you need for extra fast feedback loops. So again, like the CI and all of that, for some reason, the business users sometimes think, oh, that's like extra stuff. Hey, why do you have to do all the junk? But really, from our perspective, like me as a client, the most annoying thing is I get on a stand-up and I see, okay, these things are done. I'm like, all right, where can I see them? Well, we gotta deploy it somewhere. Okay, it's gonna take us another day. Oh, you suck as a client. You know why? Because we told you it's gonna take X, but now you're making us do all this extra stuff to deploy things. Of course, it's gonna take longer. I'm like, oh, okay, guys, fine. I guess I'll see it 2 months later. Not a good situation for anybody, because I guarantee you that whatever you produce is probably not going to be exactly what I want, because I don't know what I want yet. So stage and production environments, the sooner you set them up, the better. And the key for stage is it needs to be available to the QA, BA, hopefully maybe even the user, if they're actually willing to spend time with you, which you figure out in the previous phase. And automating the build and setting up the CI pipeline. Again, you don't want to do that stuff, right? So just automate it from the beginning. Like, you don't want to waste your time on it. And the cool thing was that middle developer or senior developer who's in the middle in US, you don't want to be supporting him trying to figure out how to fix the build, right? So before you get started, IDE versions, all that junk needs to be discussed, agreed to, and then you also understand who's responsible for what, you don't have any surprises, right? Stuff just works. Agree on code review process. So that's, to me, it's near and dear. I'm a monster when it comes to requiring people to do certain things. But at the very least, everybody has to understand what steps you have to follow to get a feature from your kind of brain into the actual workable solution. And for that, it's not necessarily even about just PRs, right? It's maybe about the fact that you want to see those commits on a daily basis. You want to see multiple commits per day. You want to have messages that actually explain to a guy in the US why you're doing it. More importantly, you want the guy in the US to write why is he doing what he is doing, so that you don't have an opportunity to talk to him all day long, right? But you at least can read and understand why he's trying to get it through. And another thing is, if you, for example, have a great architect who is in the middle of a review process, but he's a busy guy, and he is approving everything, and without approving, you're not getting through, okay, you're screwed, the customer's screwed, everybody's screwed. So you need to adjust and agree right away. Collaborative source control rules is pretty much what I just said. Use it to communicate, but also don't forget that you do want to communicate openly in language and video on a daily basis. And then agreeing on a release process. Okay, well, that's kind of obvious of how long it takes to get stuff from here to here. It allows you to do better planning. It also avoids surprises of somebody deploying to production when things are not ready or when nobody approved it. So also decide who's going to do it, because as soon as you decide who's going to do it, make sure that guy's available and send them an invite for a week of the scheduled time, right, when you actually need to deploy it. Because Thanksgiving comes along and hey, things happen. Implementation and release. So this is really about staying on top of things and continuing to make sure that we don't go sideways in terms of our understanding. So one thing that is kind of funny, and so I worked in an environment where I had to do a lot of documentation, mock-ups, and stuff like that. And I got used to the fact that, okay, I do it and I explain stuff based on it and we kind of get on the same page. But then I got lazy and I just started explaining stuff, high level. Oh, okay, here's like the process, okay, it's just a form, you go do it, I'll adjust it. And what I realized is there was a situation where, like, and I don't know if you remember it, but it was basically 3 days, right? I asked for something, I get something back, I'm like, yeah, not quite. So I would talk through it again. I'm like, no, dude, come on. This is how it's supposed to work, right? And then the team goes away, and the next day I come in, I'm like, damn, it's still not the same. It's still not what I wanted. So the next thing I do is I sit down and I draw the mock-up, draw the lines, put the question marks. Then I use that to go to the developer and say, okay, dude, let's talk through that. Visual aids. So in other words, it's not a point of documenting everything as it is because it will never change. It's documenting it so that you understand the process, you understand at which point in the process a form comes in. You understand why people are using that form, what the rules for it are. But you guaranteed that everything is going to change, right? So again, use it for visual aid, but do not fall into the trap of saying, oh, I heard him, so I'm going to go do what I think is right. And if your BA or PM doesn't do that for you, you have to get them to the point where they actually give you that information. So it's actually on us to kind of train them and get them to do the right thing. Discuss design, capture lightweight documentation. Because you're distributed, you are not on a whiteboard most of the time. So what has been really helpful is when the design is actually done high level ahead of time, you can do whiteboard, right? You can take pictures, photos. You don't have to do it in whatever the tools nowadays are, Draw.io. But you take pictures, you put it in a document, you put notes, right? Highlight it, share it, talk it through. So now you have documented design that somebody actually agreed to, and we can move forward. Doesn't have to be a approval process, but important to have in place. Enforcing stable trunk or master and minimal branching complexity. I, at some point, got sick of fixing stuff after people. So before, I thought, okay, well, I'm gonna get them out of my hair. So you guys are gonna do your own branches and do stuff there, and then we'll figure it out. What I found is that people would actually spend all this time procrastinating or doing whatever, and I wouldn't see what they're doing. And then, okay, we got release in a week. Hey, whoop-de-doo, now I have to spend that week trying to figure out what the hell I'm gonna do. And we're gonna miss release, guaranteed. So basically the approach that I find works better is, yes, I mean, if you have a big team, it's a different strategy. You can do feature branches, you can do team branches. But having one place where you have continually updated good state of the system is the best way to do it. Because then, as soon as it breaks, you fix it. As soon as it breaks, you go get that middle developer and you work with him to fix it. So it takes a little bit of time to shake that process out. That's why you started from the beginning. And then over time, it becomes smooth. Without it, you're just adding risk. Daily team stand-ups and blocker resolution, self-explanatory. What I am surprised by is that in some cases, we think that just doing like email and Slack for a stand-up is good enough. If you're distributed, basically you need to be talking to the guy every day, and it's an exception when you're just sending like a status report saying, okay, here's what I've done. Because you are not able to ask questions, they're not able to ask questions, and let's say if I get a status report in the middle, or like in the middle of my morning as a client, and there's a blocker or risk, okay, I'm gonna look at it later. They just went away. If I am on a phone in the morning, and I hear the pressure in the voice saying, dude, you don't fix this today, it's gonna be bad. Okay, I feel guilty now because I have a personal relationship, I'm gonna go do it before I get to anything else. So basically, your dailies should really be talking to people. And yes, I understand the stuff, but at the same time, go back to that first point, pre-schedule things, right? So grooming, planning, all that stuff, decide how you want it, pre-schedule it with a client so that it's not a 4-hour endeavor. You can do like split them into hours, and you have daily stand-ups at a time that's convenient to you. And we'll get you from there. Bi-weekly demos. If you can do demos at a feature level, just for fun, or you have great QAs, you can share screencasts, it's even better. But at least bi-weekly demos, because whenever you're distributed, this is the worst thing of you work on something for a long time, you provide it to the customer, and you do not see the happy face of, oh, this is exactly what we wanted. So midway through the process, usually there are touch points. They can be screenshots, they can be just talking through things. Usually it's with BA who takes responsibility for it. If it's a customer, it's even better. But if you guys are not demoing something in a 2-week period, I mean, you're probably doing something wrong. And I know that there are platforms and other things that you can do where it takes a long time to develop, but even if you're demoing not a system, but a freaking document with, okay, outcomes of, hey, we just did a spike for 2 weeks, and here are the things we learned, and here's the recommendations we made. Okay, consider that a demo. Right? You don't have to show UI flow. On the other hand, if UI is a risk, you better be demoing it as much as possible. And weekly risk escalation. So to answer the question of what do you do when things change? Well, okay guys, things are going to change. They always change. Like as I said, 25%. Every time you talk to a customer, something changes. So the concern is how does it affect the rest of the delivery? And the important thing here is that if you are not bringing that up, that it's a risk, you're not doing your job as a team lead. Because once you find that something changed and now it moves the deadline, it introduces risks, anything else, you should bring it up. As a distributed guy, okay, you may forget about it, right? As a guy who is sitting there at lunch, you can tell him, dude, this is a really bad idea, we're gonna skip the release. You still better put it in an email. Because when you miss the release, and it's not in an email, okay, well, why didn't you guys let me know? What happened? So make sure that the risk specifically, doesn't have to be status per se, but risks have to be brought up on a weekly basis if they appear. And I think I'm going to skip that slide because we're at 52 minutes. And
Let's just read it.
no, so yeah, well, Eugene, you want to do 5 minutes or?
Yeah, I think they're self-explanatory, but anyway, establish a culture of accountability. Make sure that you're on the same page with the people, distributed people, right? Very important to use actually clear metrics. That's what Alex mentioned, Billy mentioned. We should have definition of time. We should have acceptance criteria we agreed to. Yeah, what Alex mentioned a couple of times and what is most important, focus on result and plan for changes. Because as Alex said, 25% all the time that's happening on all the projects. Structure daily, weekly meetings, discussed, empower your team to make a decision. And that's the important part actually. So you need to grow up the team in a way that they feel the power actually to make the decision. Sometimes it happens very often when people trying to do some idea and they like it back and forth with the architect team to make this decision. So it's very important to keep delivery on a high level without delay to make people power enough to make the decision they are doing. For example, on the relativity project, if we're responsible for any feature, we are responsible completely for the internal technical details we are doing. And that's the trust we have from the customer. And that's very important. The next thing is actually wins and celebrations. That's very important to keep team motivated to work in a comfort zone. You need to celebrate small wins. All the time you have any demo, so that's, I don't know, team building or other activities, drink beer, drink.
Daily drink beer.
Not daily.
Like daily stand up with the beer.
Yeah, and also if there is possibility to meet in person, we should do that.
That's actually a huge thing, and this is, guys, what we're always promoting. Because, like, I know some of you travel to customers, and some of you do it regularly. It's you start with stalking, right? But it's that connection. I guess that kind of brings me to the closing points. Whenever you're in a distributed team, I think one of the core things that has to happen is it has to be a one team, right? So you have to feel like you're part of the same team, you have the same goals. Because as soon as you start hearing things like, oh, those BAs, or like, oh, that guy in the US, right? Oh my God, he always breaks stuff, right? Okay, that's not one team. That's like us and some people who get in our way. So essentially for us, it's important to figure out how do we get them to be part of the team. It's not an easy thing. Sometimes you get unlucky, it will never happen, but it's a continuous process that you have to do. And in addition to that, it's really, overlap the hours so that you can talk. The more you talk, the better you are in terms of understanding the changes and the needs and having a relationship. So, any questions?
So what if American team starts to work at 10 a.m. and they are in California? So it's already, it's 8 p.m. in Ukraine, and it's very hard to do daily stuff.
Overlap.
Yeah, hard to find overlap. What?
Yeah, so basically from our side, when you discuss that from the beginning, you have a very good negotiation chip, right? So guys, this is what we're gonna do. If you happen to do that in the middle of the process, you basically have to go and negotiate. And I'll tell you, it's all about relationship, right? So if, for example, I have a good relationship, I will feel guilty about somebody being there at like 8 p.m. when I clearly can do a call from home at 8:30, right? So essentially, continue doing it, but it's negotiation to get to the time that you want. And if it's a big problem, okay, well then yeah, you continue escalating until it's solved, because it's a morale issue. And it's basically hurting the team in that we're not able to solve a simple thing with our awesome team members in California.
Well, we used to have such situation working with California, and you know what was the compromise is that one day, well, we used to have twice a week calls, and one call was actually late at our time, but another one was late at
There
their
you go.
time. And you know what happened eventually? They start coming to the work at normal time, so we had because we can do that call from home, for example, at 8 p.m. Not a problem, but they cannot.
Guys, I mean, full
So that forced
disclosure.
them to change their rules a little bit.
You know,
So that you can try that.
Full disclosure, I mean, I was that asshole at some point. But I changed my ways. I found ways, okay? It's not that difficult. I mean, it's even, you know, the basics of just do it from the car, do it on the way to work, right? There are ways to solve it.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Well, I have one from a technical perspective.
Sure.
This distributed stuff with teams, for example, you have a feature for 3 weeks out of 3 months, and you made design sessions with this UI UX guy, senior / middle. You discussed everything, and seems like everything is okay. But when the time comes, you open APR and see that this is a shit. And you need to understand what to do next. You can like agree with this, deliver on time, and after that, architecture and the quality of your product will stay. Or you can say no, this is not going to work, and after that you will make customer unhappy because like you are not going to deliver it on time.
So let me ask you a question. When did you open that PR? Was it after 3 weeks?
Of course, after 3 weeks, because
Right.
it's impossible to track it every day. It's just like how it works. It's impossible to see the commits every day.
I mean, there's no such thing as impossible. It's difficult.
Well, in that case, we should allocate 20% more to see all this stuff. And I'm pretty
Right,
sure.
or replace the person that's doing that to you if they're not being able to. Basically, they're not trainable.
Yeah, that's the problem. We have these 3 months, and we can't just even if we replace this guy, the already time spent, and we should
You
figure out something.
can't open PR in 3 weeks. You need to see a daily progress. PR can be open from the very beginning.
I would say basically that, again, where I understand why you feel that way, right? Because you feel like, okay, he should be doing a good job. And my saying is that if everybody in the world was just doing their job, the world would be a great place. But the whole point of this is that you get processes in place to control that. And you can bring that up as a risk earlier, right? So even if you're seeing, okay, you can do it every day, do it every other day. But you're seeing the progress, and you can escalate that to, let's say, his manager or whoever, or the customer, and say, ooh, this guy's going off rails, you don't even have to fix it yourself. So basically the point is, once you're at 3 week PR, yeah, you're screwed. So at that point, you have to basically approach it as typical triage. Okay, how important is this? What are we gonna do? Because now essentially you're gonna probably have to put in another feature to fix this if you cannot even get it to a releasable stage. But you cannot do that. It's not a good way to do it. You have to be able to track it over time as it gets built up. That way you avoid surprises. It's not a guy there. You got guys here who are the same way. Like you let them do it for 2 weeks, you're gonna be having fun.
Okay, what if we have this vice versa situation when we are making this feature for 3 weeks and those guys from US are not seeing these PRs every day, for example, and we need to have his approval to move further. And this 3 weeks comes, he opened the PR and saw that everything is a little bit different from
Unexpected.
his expectations. Here.
It's exactly the same point, right? That is basically that discussion about architects who will sit there and they will prevent you from getting something out. Okay, they can review, I guess relativity is a good example. Like the way architects work there is kind of nice because they have the review power and he actually has time and he has to, well, he not doesn't, but he has to make time because he has 5 teams and he has to track their progress essentially to make sure nobody goes sideways. And he does that daily. So when he sees something going wrong, he jumps in and he starts adjusting it. I mean, that's an agreement that you have to pick. You do the retro, you come up with the thing that you think will work, you provide it, you move forward. But again, the point is you got to do it daily. Like you can't wait for 3 weeks. Because then you're going to spending another weekend working on something because you feel responsible, and we all have this problem, right? Oh my God, but it's our system, so we're going to spend a weekend and we're going to fix it. Well, you didn't solve the problem at all. You're just going to get slammed with it next time. But let's talk about it also afterwards. You want some more tactical ideas. All right, guys. I think that's it.
Thank you. We are the best, or you are the best.
Подождите, у нас есть подарочек. Подождите, сейчас еще пицца будет. После этого воркшопа вам прилетит обратная связь. Мы, как всегда, собираем, потому что мы всегда хотим улучшаться. Женя, мы хотим тебе задарить вот такую вот булочку. Собственно говоря, спасибо тебе большое, что ты делишься своими знаниями. Алекс любит играть в волейбол, баскетбол, вообще очень спортивный человек, и поэтому присоединяйся к нашей баскетбольной команде. Будешь играть